I want to talk about chapter 31 and 32 together as one idea. These are chapters on businesses' operations with typical government agencies such as the EOC and OSHA. The first few slides deal, though, with the area of workers' compensation. I'm not going to get into that one too much. I do want to point out something that is misunderstood often in this area. Workers' compensation is an insurance program. Many people think it's some type of government benefit, welfare based. It is not. It is basically a requirement that all employers of a certain size pay into an insurance provider who would then cover injuries that are work related. Think of it like driving a car. If you drive on the state's highways, you must purchase insurance, not so much for your own negligence as is for all negligence. And so in this case, whatever fault there is disregarded in a work-related accident. The worker basically waives his right to sue the employer by participating in the workers' compensation scheme, which in fact provides probably the better of the two options for any type of damages out of a work-related injury, such as hospitalization, permanent loss of limb, and other types of damages. So do think of it as an insurance scheme. That is what it is. Try not to be misled by others who are not completely aware. Another area is OSHA, and for the OSHA discussion, this is on page 5 in the PowerPoint. I want to bring up a story which I was involved with in regard to a client and OSHA. In a client case who worked as a feed mill, there was a horrific accident where an individual lost his life. The story, basically, without the gruesome details, is that the individual came to work early one morning, went to the top of the mill where there were lots of pulleys and belts and flywheels. The worker who came in second did not realize someone was up in that large loft, turned on the machine that would operate the pulleys and the flywheels, and the individual worker who first arrived was crushed to death. OSHA came in because OSHA has a right to come in when there is a death. They don't have a right to come in unless you invite them if there is injuries that are not fatal. In this case, there was a fatal injury, and OSHA began to assess the damages, and sure enough, the individual's life could have been saved had there been simply a cage surrounding this large flywheel, just a simple screen to keep him from having his torso inside this area. If you look at it in the terms of cost, OSHA's perspective is that for the cost of a $5 screen, an individual's life could have been saved. So OSHA doesn't come down hard immediately. They do assess fines, penalties. Workers' compensation would cover the family's damages, the loss for those survivors. But OSHA said, you need to correct this, here's your penalty. But OSHA does, I think, a remarkable thing, which is that it's by statute required to negotiate with the party who basically commits the wrong, in this case the feed mill. And so we negotiated with OSHA several times, actually I remember 3, where each time OSHA understood our situation, understood our finances. The client was not a wealthy client by any means. In fact, it ran fairly at a no profit level just to keep the farmers in the community working with the feed mill, having a feed mill. And so OSHA began to understand more and more, and we got, I think, a very fair price for the loss that we caused. The penalty was not as severe as it was at the beginning. So do think of OSHA as someone that is a good influence in the workforce. Again, there's a lot of bad publicity, and I can understand why, because OSHA does cost businesses, but it's when businesses fail to provide safe standards or healthy standards for employees. More on that, you can, I would, if your company is involved with ocean anyway, you really should have an attorney. That is not something you want to do by yourself. There's a lot of problems in this area if you try to represent yourself. I want to mention then the next slide, page 6, on the FLSA. The book does a great job on these areas, but I do want to highlight an area, which is that if you have a business which is teetering on whether to call someone a wage earner or a salaried individual, salary individuals are exempt from overtime, wage earners are not. And if that is the case, I would tend to be a little more cautious and call the person a wage earner. And here's why. In this area, there are severe penalties, sometimes up to $10,000 per violation, and that can be a daily violation if indeed you're paying somebody salary who should be wage earner. So again, I would recommend picking up the phone, calling your attorney if you have questions by any means. These penalties are very severe. We're going to move into then, let's see, the immigration area. That's page 11 in this slide series. Immigration laws right now are such a mess. They're in flux. It takes a specialist. It used to not be a specialty. It was such a small area, but right now immigration issues are very inflamed because of the recent administration's hostility towards immigration. It's a sad situation, I think, personally, because immigration has been historically a backbone to bringing in skilled workers and more to the United States. And as a matter of fact, we're seeing a brain drain, which is that individuals who are degreed are not coming into the United States. Companies are responding to this, trying to work around some of these immigration areas. But indeed, I think immigration reform does need to take place, but the reform should be the opposite of what's happening in this area. Reform being that we need to make it more fair. We need to understand where the markets are and how to basically encourage people to immigrate into the United States where the United States markets and industries are deficient. But again, I want to mention this one. The biggest issue is our human relations issue, which is basically making sure that the documentation is proper for the hiring. I would, if this is your issue, take an HR course because there is much more to know about immigration and employment. There is the other side of immigration, which is immigration and families, but this book in the business text, in the business context, really would stick to immigration in the business area, such as hiring. The issues next is a discussion on unionization and labor law. These issues I will not cover on a PowerPoint, I'm sorry, on a YouTube lecture. The book I think does a very good job, and these are absolutely very detailed. This is one area where you just simply follow the administrative rule, you follow the case law. Again, if you're working in this area, especially if you're in HR, you will contact an attorney to work with you on any type of issue with regard to unionization.